Shogun has now reached its halfway point with the recent release of episode 5, and I thought it was only right that after talking about the formidable warrior and leader of the Eastern Army, Yoshii Toranaga, who was based on Ieyasu Tokugawa, it should now be the time where we spoke about the person on the other side of the war, the Western Army, Ishido, who's based on the real historical figure called Ishida Mitsunari. Within this video, I thought I'd delve into the history of the person, how he fared in the battle, and what eventually became of the person that we're seeing depicted on screen as Ishido. So let's not wait any longer and get right on into it. Here is the real story of Ishido. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers from the real events that happened in history, and thus might spoil what's to come in the show. So if you want to go into the show with no knowledge of what could happen, then this video might not be for you. I just want to give you a heads up. Ishido is the antagonist that we've seen being depicted on screen throughout the first 5 episodes of Shogun. Whilst he's the main antagonist, we've not actually had that much screen time of him. However, following the head of Jozen being sent to him in Osaka and Toranaga being aware of what Nagakado attacking Jozen meant, with Ochiba now pressuring Ishido into retaliating and taking out Toranaga, the final half of the season will most likely look to put Ishido at the center of the conflict that's occurring, and have him being responsible for some of the larger events that go on to occur. When looking at the real-life person, Ishida Mitsunari, prior to serving the Taiko Toyotomi Hideyoshi, he was a monk in a Buddhist temple. However, that is something that is doubted because this was something which only started getting mentioned during the Edo period. Hideyoshi and Ishida had a relatively long-lasting relationship as they both met in 1577 when Ishida was only 18 years old, and at this point, Toyotomi Hideyoshi was not the Taiko, but he was the daimyo of Nagahama. As time went on, Ishida eventually became a samurai officer for Hideyoshi. It's said that Ishida was taken to Hideyoshi's office because of his skill in the art of tea ceremony. But he proved that he also had talents in administration and finance, something which he and his brother served Hideyoshi in doing from 1585 onwards. Hideyoshi trusted Ishida, but it was said that a lot of the other men didn't. They saw him as a bit of a schemer, and that meant that he'd often make enemies. For example, he once wrote to Hideyoshi and blamed 2 other men, Kuroda and Kobayakawa Hideaki, for a failure in a campaign and wrote how they weren't good leaders. This led Hideyoshi to want to send them back home in disgrace, but Ieyasu Tokugawa got involved and managed to get him to change his mind. This is said to be the very beginning of the conflicting views that Tokugawa and Ishida had, and the conflicting relationship that they went on to develop. As time went on, Ishida participated in multiple battles such as the Battle of Shizugutaki, and also the Battle of Komaki and Nagakuti. As well as that, he was also in charge of a mission to spy on an opposing army, so he was showing his worth and value to Hideyoshi throughout this time and was becoming a trusted individual. However, it was once Hideyoshi gained power and became the Taiko that Ishida was appointed to be one of the 5 Bugyo, which was one of the top administrators in Hideyoshi's government, something which ultimately meant that he became a daimyo himself, daimyo of Sawayama. Due to the trust and loyalty that had been exhibited during Hideyoshi's reign, once he died, he retained his position in government, but as we saw in the show, it was spread across the council of 5 regions who were representing Hideyoshi's son, who was still not of age to rule. So until he became of age, the 5 regions were supposed to rule in his name, and then they'd eventually make way for the new Taiko. The main story of Mitsunari Ishida, and the one that is long etched into the history books, is what I imagine we're seeing the show building towards, and that's centered around the Battle of Sekigahara, a battle between the Western Army, which was controlled by Tokugawa Ieyasu, and the Eastern Army, which was led by Mitsunari Ishida. Following the death of the Taiko of the time, Hideyoshi, it caused even more friction and hostility to be formed between Tokugawa Ieyasu as he saw his opportunity to be able to get more power and become the ruler of Japan. All of this essentially came to a climax with the Battle of Sekigahara, something which occurred on October the 21st, 1600. Ieyasu Tokugawa was an individual who essentially couldn't be trusted to stand in line and be a supporter of the Toyotomi government, whose lord was still not old enough to rule. So with Ieyasu looking like a threat, Ishida rallied Toyotomi loyalists together, formed alliances, and wanted to stand against Tokugawa. Most of these alliances came from the 3 other regions that were already part of the council. Whilst Ishida was the general of the Eastern Army, there was something that happened in particular that's said to have turned the tides and could have had a damaging effect on the outcome of the battle that occurred. And that is when Ishida Mitsunari led a large army to Osaka Castle, which is where the family members of Hideyoshi's generals all lived. He planned on taking them hostage and threatened to kill them if the generals didn't side with him and become his ally and join his forces. During this time, the real-life person that the character Mariko was based on, Tamako, was killed by their family retainer due to the threat of Ishida potentially taking her, and the mansion that she lived in was then set on fire. Her death was something which actually impacted Ishida's reputation prior to the Battle of Sekigahara. Her death was also said to have impacted both armies and not just Ishida's. It impacted Ishida because it reduced the chances of him being able to recruit more allies to join his side of the Western Army. And apparently some of them were said to be secret Christians, something which Tamako was openly. Plus, when that was paired with Ieyasu Tokugawa promising other daimyo from the Western Army land and leniency after the battle if they switched sides, it was something that didn't end well for Ishida as people started betraying him. Kobuyakawa Hideaki switching sides to Tokugawa was something which allowed Ieyasu to take the advantage. Many of the other lords also decided to stay neutral as they didn't want to commit to a side that would eventually go on to lose. Ishida was eventually defeated at the Battle of Sekigahara and he tried to escape. However, he was captured by some villagers in support of the Eastern Army. From here, he was then transported to Kyoto where he was set to be executed. On the night before his execution, he actually refused to eat his last meal because he believed that he wouldn't actually be killed. However, that wasn't the case at all. The following day, he was executed and his head was placed on a stand for the people of Kyoto to be able to see. History is something that wasn't necessarily kind to Ishida, as he was often remembered as being weak due to him losing the battle. However, as time has gone on, the reputation of the general has improved in some way, as it's said that if more people actually stayed loyal to him and didn't switch sides to Tokugawa, then he may have actually won the battle and the outcome would have been completely different. So it seems like we've got all of that to come in the final 5 episodes of Shogun. The Battle of Sekigahara is going to be amazing to see being depicted on screen. Even when we saw Jozen and his men being obliterated, although it was a small brief moment that literally only lasted a couple of seconds, it was so memorable. So let alone an all-out battle that essentially had the ruling of Japan at stake. I imagine we're also going to be seeing the lack of loyalty to Ishido and people switching sides, which will in turn make him more vulnerable. Ishida was portrayed as the villain in Shogun, but when actually looking at history, it seems like he was on the person that seemed to be more on the side of good and was honoring the Taiko that had died by being loyal to him and his son, so it's interesting seeing it being depicted like that. I also wonder if they're going to make Ishido out to be somebody that comes across as weak. Right now, it doesn't seem like that, as he seems to be commanding the Council of Regents, and Toranaga isn't necessarily fearful of him, but he's fully aware of the threat that's present. It is said that Ishida's Eastern Army outnumbered Tokugawa's Western Army, so I wonder if the landslide that occurred in the most recent episode is going to be a contributing factor as to why that is. With regards to the family of Ishida, he had 3 sons and 3 daughters, and one of his sons, Shignarai, changed his family name following his father's death so that he'd be able to survive following the outcome of the battle. So Ishida's story directly impacts the fate of Mariko, a character in the show that many of us have come to connect with, and also Ishido. I'm looking forward to seeing how Ishido is going to be depicted in the next 5 episodes of the show, because although he's been a force so far, he's been one that's just kind of been lurking in the background, so I'm stoked to see where it's gonna go. So, there you have it, Shogun Ishido's real story explained. If you want to see more videos on Shogun, then click on the card in the top corner. I've been breaking down every episode of the series, and I've also been delving into the historical figures that the characters are based on, so if you want to see more of that, then it's over on the channel. Which character would you like to see delved into next? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.